The letter trembled in Francesca Zimmer's hands as the stagecoach rattled over the dusty Texas terrain. Each jolt sent her stomach lurching, though she couldn't be certain if it was the rough trail or her impending fate causing the discomfort. At 22, she had never imagined selling herself as a mail-order bride, but desperation had a way of reshaping one's principles. "Not much longer now, miss," the driver called from above. "Fort Davis is just over that ridge. Fort Davis, Texas." The words looked innocuous on paper when she'd read the advertisement back in Philadelphia. Now they represented a future she'd agreed to sight unseen with a man whose only attractive quality was his ability to pay. The coach rolled into town as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street. Fort Davis was exactly what Francesca had pictured in her worst imaginings, a dusty collection of wooden buildings with hitching posts, saloons, and weary-looking residents who seemed perpetually squinting against the sun and sand. "This here's your stop," the driver announced, pulling to a halt in front of a whitewashed building with a sign proclaiming it the Fort Davis Hotel. "Someone's supposed to meet you." Francesca gathered her two small trunks containing everything she'd managed to salvage after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts. Her blue traveling dress was wrinkled from the 3-day journey, and she did her best to smooth it with trembling hands. The promise of security had driven her west, but now that she'd arrived, fear threatened to overwhelm her. A portly man in an expensive suit approached, waving a handkerchief at the sweat beading on his forehead despite the mild April weather. His smile revealed gold teeth that matched the watch chain stretched across his substantial belly. "Miss Zimmer, welcome to Fort Davis. I'm Bartholomew Jenkins, representing Mr. Harrington." He bowed slightly, the effort clearly taxing. "I trust your journey was pleasant." "As pleasant as could be expected, Mr. Jenkins," Francesca replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I was told Mr. Harrington would meet me himself." Jenkins tucked his handkerchief away. "Ah, well, there's been a slight change of plans. Mr. Harrington has decided to— how shall I put this delicately? He's decided to entertain additional options." "Additional options," Francesca repeated, her chest tightening. "I don't understand." "Mr. Harrington is a very wealthy man, Miss Zimmer, the most prosperous cattle baron in the county. When word got out that he was seeking a bride, several interested parties suggested a more competitive arrangement." A woman passing by shot Francesca a sympathetic glance before hurrying on. "What exactly are you saying, Mr. Jenkins?" Francesca asked, though she feared she already knew. "There's to be an auction tomorrow evening. Several gentlemen have expressed interest in securing a bride, and Mr. Harrington has graciously agreed to allow them to bid. The highest bidder will have the honor of your hand." Jenkins smiled as though he'd just announced she'd won a prize. "An auction?" Francesca's voice rose. "I am not livestock to be sold to the highest bidder. My arrangement was with Mr. Harrington specifically." Jenkins shrugged, unperturbed by her outrage. "Your passage has been paid, Miss Zimmer. The terms were clear. You agreed to marry in exchange for your journey west. Mr. Harrington has simply transferred that obligation to whoever wishes to fulfill it. I assure you, only the most respectable gentlemen of means will be participating." Francesca wanted to scream, to flee back to the stagecoach and demand passage eastward, but the harsh reality of her situation crushed these impulses. She had nowhere to go, no money, no family. She was trapped. "Where am I to stay until this auction?" she asked, the word bitter on her tongue. "The hotel has been arranged. Everything is taken care of." Jenkins gestured to the building behind him. "Tomorrow evening at 8, you'll be presented at Mr. Harrington's home. Until then, I suggest you rest and prepare yourself to meet your future husband." With that, Jenkins tipped his hat and waddled away, leaving Francesca standing amid her trunks, the dust of Fort Davis settling on her once fine shoes. Inside the hotel, the clerk handed her a key without meeting her eyes. It seemed everyone in town knew her purpose here. The shame burned as she climbed the stairs to a small but clean room with a narrow bed and wash basin. Once alone, Francesca finally allowed the tears to come. She'd known this journey would be difficult, had prepared herself for marriage to a stranger, but being auctioned off like cattle was beyond humiliating. Her father would be turning in his grave if he knew how low his only daughter had fallen. A knock at the door startled her from her misery. Hastily wiping her eyes, she opened it to find a young woman with kind eyes holding a tray. "Thought you might want some tea," the woman said. "I'm Mary, I help out around here." "Thank you," Francesca replied, accepting the tray. "That's very kind." Mary lingered in the doorway. "I heard about what's happening tomorrow. It ain't right if you ask me." Francesca's throat tightened. "No, it isn't, but I don't see that I have much choice." "There's always a choice," Mary said quietly. "Just maybe not the ones we want." She hesitated. "There's a few decent men in this town, among the rotten ones. I hope you end up with one of the good ones." After Mary left, Francesca sat by the window, watching the comings and goings of Fort Davis as dusk settled. Men in dusty hats and spurs, women with baskets of goods, children chasing each other in the last light of day. This would be her home now among these strangers, bound to whichever man placed the highest value on her person. She was still sitting there when darkness fell completely, the street now illuminated by lanterns from storefronts and saloons. A commotion below caught her attention. A group of cowboys had ridden into town, their horses throwing up dust as they dismounted in front of one of the saloons. One man stood out among them, taller than the others, with broad shoulders and an easy grace as he swung down from a magnificent chestnut stallion. Unlike his companions who immediately headed for the saloon doors, he paused, looking up and down the street as though searching for something. When he turned, Francesca caught a glimpse of his face in the lantern light's strong features beneath the shadow of his hat, and eyes that seemed to be taking in everything. For a moment, those eyes seemed to find her window, and Francesca instinctively drew back. There was something in that brief glance that stirred something inside her, a feeling so foreign in her current circumstances that it took her a moment to recognize it as hope. Dismissing the foolish thought, she turned away from the window. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. Tomorrow she would be sold to the highest bidder, and that was that. Morning came with a tray of breakfast and a note from Jenkins instructing her to be ready by 7 that evening. A dress had been provided, a garish blue satin affair that was more appropriate for a saloon girl than a bride, but Francesca refused to wear it. Instead, she donned her best dress, a modest lavender gown with lace at the collar. If she was to be paraded and sold, she would at least maintain what dignity she could. The day dragged on interminably. Francesca alternated between pacing her small room and sitting by the window, watching the town go about its business. Twice she considered running, but the harsh reality of the wilderness beyond the town limits, not to mention her complete lack of resources, kept her rooted in place. At precisely 6:30, Jenkins arrived to escort her to Harrington's home. The Harrington estate sat on a hill overlooking Fort Davis, a gaudy mansion that seemed determined to prove its owner's wealth in every excessive detail. Francesca was led to a side room where 3 other women waited, all mail-order brides, all looking as terrified as she felt. "You're the last one," a red-headed woman whispered. "I'm Louisa. That's Beatrice and Catherine." "Francesca," she replied, taking a seat beside them. "Do any of you know what's to happen exactly?" Beatrice, A thin woman with nervous eyes shook her head. Only that we're to be presented one by one, and the men will bid on who they want. Like horses, Catherine said bitterly. She was the oldest of them, perhaps 30, with a hardness to her face that suggested she'd already weathered many of life's disappointments. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform entered, assessing them with a critical eye. "Mr. Harrington's guests are arriving. You'll be called in one at a time. Try to smile and look pleasant, it'll go better for you." "Has this happened before?" Francesca asked. The housekeeper's expression softened slightly. "Twice now. The last group of girls all got married. Most are doing all right from what I hear." "Most?" Catherine asked sharply, but the housekeeper had already turned away. "Miss Beatrice, you're first, follow me." One by one, the women were led away. Louisa went second, her face pale but determined. Catherine squeezed Francesca's hand before she was called, leaving Francesca alone with her thoughts and the muffled sounds of male voices and occasional laughter from beyond the door. Finally, the housekeeper returned. "Your turn, Miss Zimmer. Remember to smile." The auction room was actually Harrington's opulent parlor. About 15 men were seated in arranged chairs, drinks in hand, while Harrington himself, a corpulent man with a waxed mustache, stood by the fireplace, looking pleased with himself. Jenkins stood beside him with a ledger, apparently recording the bids. Francesca felt her cheeks burn as every eye in the room turned to assess her. She fought the urge to cover herself, instead lifting her chin and meeting their gazes directly. "Gentlemen, may I present Miss Francesca Zimmer of Philadelphia," Harrington announced. 22 years of age, educated, from a good family, fallen on hard times. Domestic skills include piano, embroidery, household management, and basic cookery. As you can see, a fine figure and handsome face. Bidding starts at $50. 60. Called a gray-haired man old enough to be her grandfather. 75. Countered a thin man with spectacles. The bidding continued, each sum reducing Francesca further to merchandise. She fixed her gaze on a painting above the fireplace, trying to detach herself from what was happening. When the bids reached $200, only 3 men remained in contention. 225, said a rough-looking man with a scar across his jaw. Something in his eyes made Francesca's skin crawl. 250, countered a balding man in an expensive suit. 300, the scarred man growled, staring at Francesca with naked hunger. A silence fell over the room. Harrington looked to the balding man, who shook his head. 300 going once, Jenkins called. Going twice, $500. The new voice came from the back of the room. Heads turned to see a man standing in the doorway who hadn't been there before. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty trail coat and hat, he stepped into the light. Francesca's breath caught. It was the cowboy she'd seen from her window the previous evening. "Well now," Harrington said, clearly surprised. "Mr. Nathaniel Cooper. I wasn't aware you were in the market for a bride." $500, Cooper repeated, his deep voice calm but firm. His eyes, a startling blue in his tanned face, briefly met Francesca's before returning to Harrington. "Mr. Bridges has bid 300, Jenkins said. "Do you wish to counter, sir?" The scarred man, Bridges, glared at Cooper. 350. 500, Cooper repeated, not bothering to look at Bridges. "Cash." Bridges rose halfway from his seat. "Now see here, gentlemen, please," Harrington intervened. "This is a civilized auction. Mr. Bridges, do you wish to exceed $500? Bridges stared hatefully at Cooper, then at Francesca. "No," he finally spat. "She ain't worth it." He stormed out, shouldering roughly past Cooper, who didn't budge. "Well then," Harrington said, looking pleased at the unexpectedly high price. "Sold to Mr. Cooper for $500. Jenkins will handle the paperwork." The preacher is available this evening if you wish to proceed immediately." Cooper finally looked directly at Francesca, and something in his gaze made her heart beat faster. It wasn't the predatory assessment the others had given her. There was something else there, respect, perhaps, and a question. "I'd like a word with my fiancée first, if you don't mind," Cooper said. Harrington waved his hand magnanimously. Of course. Use the garden. Jenkins, show them out." Francesca followed Cooper and Jenkins through French doors into a walled garden lit by lanterns. Jenkins hovered nearby until Cooper fixed him with a look that sent the smaller man scurrying back inside. Once they were alone, Cooper removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair. Up close, Francesca could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with laugh lines around his eyes and a serious mouth. "Miss Zimmer," he said, "I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting." His directness caught her off guard. "You just paid $500 for me, Mr. Cooper. I believe you've earned the right to call me Francesca." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Nathaniel, or Nate to most folks." He gestured to a stone bench. "May we sit?" Once seated, Francesca studied him openly. Unlike the other men at the auction, his interest in her seemed more complex than mere possession. "Why did you bid for me, Mr. Cooper?" "Nathaniel," he corrected gently, "and that's a fair question." He seemed to consider his words carefully. "I've known Harrington and his type for years. I've seen what becomes of women sold like this. Some get lucky, end up with decent men, others—" He trailed off. "So this was charity?" Francesca asked, unsure whether to be grateful or insulted. "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "I saw you yesterday at your window. You looked—" He struggled for words. "Like you didn't belong in that hotel room, waiting to be sold. Like you deserved better. And you think you're better." She couldn't keep the challenge from her voice. To her surprise, he smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "I think I'm offering you a choice, which is more than Harrington was willing to do." "What choice?" Nathaniel leaned forward, forearms resting on his thighs. "I own a ranch about 20 miles outside of town. It's not much compared to Harrington's spread, but it's mine, free and clear. I've done well enough these past few years. I can offer you a comfortable life, a respectable position as my wife." "And if I don't want that?" Francesca asked, holding her breath. "Then I'll give you the $500 and put you on the next stage to wherever you want to go." He met her eyes directly. No strings attached. Francesca stared at him, disbelief warring with a desperate hope. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you didn't want to be here, and I know what happens to women with no choices. My mother was one of them." Something dark flickered in his eyes. "No one deserves that." Before Francesca could respond, the garden door opened and Jenkins reappeared. "Mr. Harrington is wondering if you've reached a decision. The preacher won't wait all night." Nathaniel's eyes remained on Francesca, waiting, in that moment, looking into the eyes of this stranger who had offered her a choice when no one else would. Francesca made her decision. "Yes," she said. "We'll proceed with the ceremony." If she was to marry a stranger, it might as well be one who had shown her a modicum of respect. And if he proved false later, at least she would have time to plan her next move. The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Francesca and Nathaniel stood before a tired-looking preacher in Harrington's study, while Jenkins and the housekeeper served as witnesses. Francesca's hand trembled slightly as Nathaniel slipped a simple gold band onto her finger where he'd acquired it at such short notice. She couldn't guess. "By the power vested in me," the preacher intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Nathaniel hesitated, then leaned forward and placed a chaste kiss on Francesca's cheek. The gentle gesture, so different from what she'd expected, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. "Well, that's done," Harrington said, already losing interest now that the transaction was complete. "Best of luck to you both." Outside, Nathaniel led Francesca to where his horse was tethered. "We'll stay in town tonight," he said. "I have a room at the Fort Davis Inn. It's not as fancy as this place, but it's clean. Tomorrow we'll head to the ranch." "What about my trunks?" Francesca asked, suddenly remembering her few possessions at the hotel. "I'll fetch them in the morning." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The solid warmth of him at her back was strangely comforting as they rode through the dark streets of Fort Davis. The inn was indeed modest but clean. Nathaniel spoke briefly to the proprietor, then led Francesca to a room on the second floor. Once inside, an awkward silence fell between them. "I'll sleep in the chair," Nathaniel said finally, gesturing to a wooden rocker by the window. Francesca looked at him in surprise. "But we're married." Nathaniel removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "On paper, yes. But you don't know me and I don't know you. I won't claim a husband's rights unless you want me to." The unexpected consideration left Francesca speechless. After everything that had happened, this stranger, her husband, was offering her yet another choice. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't know what else to say." "You don't need to say anything." He moved toward the door. "I'll go downstairs for a while, give you some privacy to get ready for bed. Take the bed, please. I've slept in worse places than that chair." After he left, Francesca changed into her nightdress, her mind whirling with the day's events. By all measures, she'd been fortunate. Nathaniel Cooper seemed a decent man, and his ranch sounded like a safe place to land. Yet something nagged at her: the too convenient timing of his appearance, the ready cash, the way he'd known exactly where to find her. When Nathaniel returned an hour later, Francesca was sitting in the bed, covers pulled up to her waist. He nodded to her, removed his boots and gun belt, and settled into the chair with a blanket the innkeeper had provided. "Good night, Francesca," he said quietly. "Good night, Nathaniel." His name still felt strange on her tongue. "May I ask you something? Anything?" "How did you know about the auction? You weren't on Harrington's guest list." In the dim lamplight, she saw his expression grow serious. "I heard about it in town yesterday. Fort Davis isn't that big, people talk." He hesitated. "And I have history with Harrington. I knew what he was capable of." "What kind of history?" Nathaniel was quiet for so long that Francesca thought he wouldn't answer. "He owned the land adjacent to my family's small holding," he finally said. "When my father died, Harrington tried to force my mother to sell. When she refused, he made life difficult, very difficult." The shadows in his eyes told Francesca there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "It was a long time ago." He shifted in the chair, clearly uncomfortable with the personal turn of the conversation. "We should get some sleep. It's a long ride tomorrow." Francesca nodded and turned down the lamp. In the darkness, she lay awake listening to the slow, steady breathing of the stranger who was now her husband. For better or worse, her fate was tied to his now. She could only pray she'd made the right choice. Morning came with a tentative knock on the door. Nathaniel was already up and dressed, and Francesca quickly pulled the blankets higher. "Your trunks, Mrs. Cooper," came a voice from the hall. "Where would you like them?" Nathaniel opened the door, admitting a young boy with Francesca's trunks. The reality of her new name, Mrs. Cooper, struck her with unexpected force. The boy deposited the trunks and left with the coin. Nathaniel flipped him. "I'll step out so you can dress," Nathaniel said. "There's hot water in the pitcher. When you're ready, we can have breakfast downstairs before heading out." Over a breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and coffee, Nathaniel outlined their journey. "It's about 4 hours to the ranch, assuming the weather holds. We'll stop midway to rest the horse." Will it just be us at the ranch?" Francesca asked, suddenly realizing how isolated she might be. "No, there's my foreman, Jose, and his wife, Elena. They live in a small house on the property, and two hands who bunk in the stable most nights, Tommy and Lee. Good men, all of them." Francesca nodded, relieved she wouldn't be entirely alone with a man she barely knew, no matter how decent he seemed. They were just finishing their meal when the saloon doors across the street burst open and a man staggered out, followed by angry shouts. Francesca recognized him immediately. Bridges, the scarred man who had bid against Nathaniel at the auction. Nathaniel saw him too, his body tensing. "We should go," he said quietly, but it was too late. Bridges had spotted them through the inn's window. His face contorted with rage as he stumbled across the street toward the inn. "Cooper," he bellowed, pushing through the inn's door. The few other diners looked up in alarm. "You stole what was mine." Nathaniel rose slowly. "You're drunk, Bridges. Go sleep it off." Bridges ignored him, his bloodshot eyes fixing on Francesca. "You think you got the better deal, missus? You ain't heard what they say about Cooper, have you?" "That's enough." Nathaniel's voice had gone cold. "Walk away while you can." But Bridges was beyond reason, fueled by alcohol and wounded pride. "They say his ma was an Indian whore, that his pa never married her proper. Say he's got savage blood. That what you wanted in your bed, girl, a half-breed bastard." The insult hung in the air. Francesca looked at Nathaniel, saw the tightly controlled fury in his face, the way his hand hovered near his gun. "Mr. Bridges," she said clearly, standing beside Nathaniel, "my husband outbid you fair and square. Now I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further." Her calm defense seemed to enrage Bridges more. With a roar, he lunged forward, reaching for her arm. Nathaniel moved faster than Francesca thought possible, catching Bridges' wrist in a grip that made the other man gasp. "Touch my wife," Nathaniel said, his voice deadly quiet, "and it's the last thing you'll ever do." Something in his tone penetrated Bridges' drunken haze. Fear flickered across his face as he wrenched his arm free and stumbled backward. "This ain't over, Cooper," he snarled, then turned and lurched back toward the saloon. The inn had gone silent. Nathaniel turned to Francesca, concern replacing anger. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said, though her heart was racing. "Was what he said true about your mother?" Nathaniel's face closed off. "Parts of it. My mother was Comanche. My father married her properly by her people's customs, though folks around here never accepted that." He looked at her carefully. "Does it matter to you?" Francesca considered the question seriously. She'd been raised in Philadelphia, where prejudices certainly existed but were different from those in the West. "No," she said finally. "It doesn't matter to me." Something in Nathaniel's posture relaxed slightly. "We should go. I don't trust Bridges to stay away once he's drunk more courage." Within the hour, they were on the trail out of Fort Davis, Francesca's trunk secured to a packhorse Nathaniel had purchased that morning. The spring day was pleasant, with clear skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers. Under different circumstances, Francesca might have enjoyed the beautiful landscape unfolding around them, rolling hills giving way to rugged canyons, colorful wildflowers dotting the terrain. As they rode, Nathaniel gradually opened up, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history. He knew the land intimately, identifying plants and animal tracks with casual expertise. Francesca found herself genuinely interested, asking questions that seemed to please him with their insight. "How did you come to own a ranch?" she asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. Nathaniel handed her a canteen of water. "I worked cattle drives for years, saved every penny. 5 years ago, I won a high-stakes poker game in El Paso. The pot included a deed to a run-down ranch outside Fort Davis. Everyone thought I was a fool to take it instead of the cash, but I'd always wanted land of my own. And now, he smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. Now I run 400 head of cattle on 600 acres with the best water rights in the county. Turned out to be a good bet after all. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise, and Nathaniel pulled his horse to a stop. "There it is," he said, pointing to the valley below. "Cooper Ranch." Francesca followed his gaze to see a well-maintained ranch house nestled against a backdrop of rugged hills. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the picture, with a small creek winding through the property. It was modest compared to Harrington's estate, but there was something immediately appealing about its simple, sturdy presence in the landscape. "It's lovely," she said honestly. Nathaniel looked pleased. "It's not much, but it's home." As they approached, a Mexican woman emerged from the ranch house, wiping her hands on an apron. Behind her, a tall man with graying hair stepped out of the barn. "That's Alina and Jose," Nathaniel explained. "They've been with the ranch since I bought it. Good people. They're probably wondering who I'm bringing home." Alina's surprise was evident as they rode into the yard, but she recovered quickly, greeting Nathaniel warmly in accented English. "Senor Nate, we did not expect you back so soon." Her curious eyes moved to Francesca. Nathaniel helped Francesca down from the horse before addressing the couple who had now been joined by two younger men, presumably Tommy and Lee, the hands he'd mentioned. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Francesca Cooper, my wife." The stunned silence that followed would have been comical if Francesca hadn't been so nervous. Alina recovered first, her face breaking into a wide smile. "Dios mío, a wife. This is wonderful news." She rushed forward to embrace Francesca. "Welcome, Senora, welcome to your home." Jose stepped forward next, removing his hat respectfully. "It is a pleasure, Mrs. Cooper. You have surprised us all, but it is a good surprise." Tommy and Lee, both young cowboys barely out of their teens, mumbled awkward congratulations, clearly unsure how to respond to this unexpected development. "I know this is sudden," Nathaniel said, addressing his small staff, "but I'd appreciate if you'd help Mrs. Cooper feel at home. She's come a long way." Of course," Alina said, already taking charge. "Jose, boys, bring the Senora's things. Come inside, my dear. You must be tired from the journey." Inside, the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. Simple furniture, clean and well-maintained, filled the main room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, while shelves lined with books covered another. It was modest but immaculately kept, with touches that spoke of care, hand-woven rugs, pottery on the mantel, curtains at the windows. "Alina comes in 3 days a week to clean and cook," Nathaniel explained as she looked around. "The rest of the time I manage on my own." "It's lovely," Francesca said, meaning it. After the opulence of Harrington's mansion, there was something refreshingly honest about this home. Alina bustled about, showing Francesca to the bedroom, Nathaniel's room. She realized with a flutter of nerves and chattering about preparing a special dinner to celebrate. When they were briefly alone, Alina took Francesca's hands in hers. "Senor Nate is a good man," she said earnestly. "The best. I do not know how this marriage came to be so suddenly, but I am glad he has found someone." The older woman's genuine affection for Nathaniel was obvious and somewhat reassuring. If this man had earned such loyalty from his employees, perhaps Francesca had indeed made the right choice in trusting him. That evening, they all gathered around the table for a feast Alina had somehow produced on short notice. The conversation flowed more easily than Francesca had expected. with Jose sharing amusing stories about ranch life and the young hands gradually warming up to her presence. Throughout the meal, Francesca was aware of Nathaniel watching her, his expression thoughtful. He seemed pleased by how easily she conversed with his people, asking intelligent questions about the ranch operations and sharing appropriate stories from her life in Philadelphia. After dinner, Jose and the hands excused themselves to return to their duties, while Alina insisted on handling the cleanup alone. "You two should talk," she said pointedly, shooing them out to the porch. The spring evening was perfect, cool but not cold, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. They sat in rocking chairs, the silence between them companionable rather than awkward. "Your people seem very fond of you," Francesca observed. Nathaniel nodded. "They're good folks. Jose taught me everything I know about ranching. I wouldn't have made it without him. And Alina clearly thinks the world of you." He smiled slightly. "She's been trying to find me a wife for years. I think she's thrilled, even if she's probably wondering how this all happened so fast." "What did you tell them? The truth, or part of it? That we met in Fort Davis and decided to marry quickly?" He looked at her directly. "I didn't mention Harrington or the auction. That's not something anyone else needs to know." Francesca appreciated his discretion. "Thank you." They rocked in silence for a while, watching the last colors fade from the horizon. Finally, Nathaniel spoke again. "I meant what I said back in town, about not claiming husband's rights. The bedroom is yours. I can sleep out here or in the bunkhouse." Francesca studied him in the fading light. This man who had spent $500 to give her a choice, who had defended her against Bridges, who was now offering to sleep on his own porch rather than make her uncomfortable. In Philadelphia, she'd been courted by men of wealth and education, but none had shown her the simple respect Nathaniel Cooper had demonstrated in their brief acquaintance. "It's your home," she said softly. "And I am your wife legally. I don't expect you to sleep in the bunkhouse." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. "We could share the room," she continued. "There are ways to maintain propriety while we get to know each other better." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "I'd like that." "To get to know you better, I mean." Inside, Alina had already turned down the bed and laid out Francesca's nightdress from her trunk. With a knowing smile, she bid them good night and departed for her own home. That first night established a pattern that would continue in the weeks that followed. They shared the bedroom, with Nathaniel fashioning a pallet on the floor, despite Francesca's protests that the bed was large enough for both of them with a bolster between them. Each night, they would talk in the darkness, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears, until one or both drifted off to sleep. Francesca learned that Nathaniel had grown up on a small homestead near the Texas-Mexico border, the son of a former Army scout and his Comanche wife. His childhood had been difficult, caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. When his father died of pneumonia, 12-year-old Nathaniel and his mother had struggled to keep their small farm going, only to lose it to men like Harrington, who saw an opportunity to take advantage of a mixed-race woman with no protection. "What happened to your mother?" Francesca asked one night. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. "She went back to her people, the reservation." His voice was flat. "She died there 3 years later. Consumption, they said, but I think it was a broken heart. She loved my father, loved the life they'd built. Losing it all destroyed something in her." In turn, Francesca shared her own story, her happy childhood in Philadelphia, her father's business failures and eventual death, leaving her with nothing but debts and distant relatives who offered no help. The advertisement for mail-order brides had seemed a desperate but practical solution. During the days, Francesca gradually found her place at Cooper Ranch. Alina patiently taught her the basics of Western cooking and housekeeping, skills quite different from what she'd learned in Philadelphia. Jose showed her around the property, explaining the ranch operations with patient detail. To everyone's surprise, including her own, Francesca took to ranch life with unexpected aptitude. She learned to ride properly, to identify the local plants and their uses, to help with the garden Alina maintained. Her elegant hands grew calloused, her pale skin tanned in the Texas sun, and she found herself enjoying the direct, honest work in a way she never had back east. Throughout it all, Nathaniel watched her with increasing admiration. He never pushed for more intimacy, but Francesca couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed her movements, the careful way he maintained a respectful distance even as the attraction between them grew more palpable. 1 month after their unusual marriage, Francesca was helping Alina prepare dinner when the older woman fixed her with a knowing look. "You care for him," Alina said, not a question. Francesca concentrated on the vegetables she was chopping. "He's been kind to me." Alina made a dismissive sound. "It is more than kindness between you. I see how you look at each other, yet still he sleeps on the floor." Francesca felt her cheeks flush. "It's complicated, Alina. Pa, only because you make it so." Alina waved her wooden spoon emphatically. "Life is short, my hija, too short for such games." That evening, as Francesca and Nathaniel sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they'd established, she found herself studying his profile. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the eyes that reflected both strength and gentleness. Over the past month, she'd come to know this man, his integrity, his quiet humor, his commitment to the land and people under his care. What had begun as a desperate choice in Fort Davis had evolved into something else entirely. "Penny, for your thoughts," Nathaniel said, catching her gaze. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a month," she replied honestly. "When I arrived in Fort Davis, I thought my life was over in a way, that I'd made a terrible mistake. And now," Francesca smiled, "now I think perhaps it was the best mistake I ever made." Something flickered in Nathaniel's eyes, hope, perhaps, or longing. He reached across the space between their chairs, his hand hovering near hers, asking permission. Francesca linked her fingers with his, her heart quickening at the simple contact. "Francesca," he began, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something about the auction." She tensed slightly. "What about it?" Nathaniel took a deep breath. "It wasn't chance that I was there that night. I'd heard rumors in town about what Harrington was planning. It wouldn't be the first time he'd arranged such a thing." "You came specifically to bid?" Francesca asked, confused. "Not exactly." Nathaniel looked uncomfortable. "I came to stop it. I had a plan to create a distraction to help whoever was being auctioned escape during the confusion. But then I saw you, standing there with such dignity despite everything, and I couldn't risk it going wrong, so I bid instead." Francesca stared at him. "You were going to help me escape, without even knowing me." "I told you about my mother," he said quietly. "What happened to her after my father died. I couldn't stand by and let another woman be sold like property, not if I could help." The realization of what he'd done, what he'd been willing to do for a stranger, moved something deep inside Francesca. This man had not only saved her from Harrington's auction, but had been prepared to risk himself to help her escape, expecting nothing in return. "Thank you," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "Not just for what you did, but for telling me the truth." Nathaniel's fingers tightened around hers. "There's something else I should tell you, since we're being honest, something I probably should have said before now." "What is it?" He met her eyes directly. "I'm falling in love with you, Francesca. I think I started falling the moment I saw you standing in that room," refusing to be broken by what was happening. "You don't have to say anything back. I just wanted you to know." The simple declaration, delivered without flourish or expectation, broke the last of Francesca's reservations. In that moment, she knew with certainty that the feelings that had been growing in her over the past month weren't gratitude or convenience, but something far deeper and more real. "Nathaniel," she said softly, rising from her chair. She stood before him, still holding his hand. "I think perhaps we've been overly cautious with each other." He looked up at her, hope and uncertainty warring in his expression. "Would you kiss me?" she asked. "Properly this time, as a husband kisses his wife." Nathaniel stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. He was close enough now that she could feel the warmth of him, see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Gently, he cradled her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "Are you sure?" he whispered. In answer, Francesca rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, he remained still, as though afraid she might change her mind. Then, with a soft sound of surrender, his arms went around her, drawing her closer as he deepened the kiss. It was nothing like the chaste peck on the cheek from their wedding. This was a real kiss, full of longing and promise, and Francesca felt herself responding with an intensity that might have shocked her proper Philadelphia self. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easily now. "I think I've known it for weeks, but I was afraid to trust it, afraid to trust myself after everything that happened." Nathaniel pressed his forehead to hers. "We can still take this slowly. I want you to be sure." Francesca smiled, feeling truly free for the first time since leaving Philadelphia. "I am sure. About this. About us." That night, Nathaniel did not make his pallet on the floor. Instead, husband and wife truly became one, finding in each other's arms the belonging they had both been seeking. Life at Cooper Ranch settled into a new rhythm after that night. The change in Nathaniel and Francesca's relationship was obvious to everyone, though mercifully no one commented directly. Alina's knowing smiles were comment enough, and even the young ranch hands seemed pleased by their boss's evident happiness. Summer came to the Texas hills, bringing long, hot days and work that never seemed to end. Francesca threw herself into ranch life with increasing confidence, proving herself a quick study and willing partner. By July, she could ride as well as any of the hands, help with the easier ranch chores, and keep the house running with efficiency that impressed even Alina. It was during a particularly hot afternoon in late July that trouble returned to their lives. Francesca was alone in the house, Nathaniel and the men having ridden out at dawn to check on a section of fence that had been reported down. She was making preserves from the summer berries when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Looking out the window, her blood froze. 3 riders were approaching the house, and she recognized the lead rider immediately. Bridges, the scarred man from the auction. With him were 2 rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Francesca grabbed the rifle Nathaniel had taught her to use and positioned herself by the window, out of direct sight but with a clear view of the yard. The men dismounted, Bridges swaggering toward the house as though he owned it. "Hello, the house," he called. "Anybody home?" Francesca remained silent, hoping they might think the place empty and leave. No such luck. "Come on out, Mrs. Cooper," Bridges called, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "I know you're in there, saw the smoke from the chimney, just want to have a friendly chat." One of his companions laughed, the sound ugly and threatening. "Your husband and his boys are way out by the East Ridge," Bridges continued. "Won't be back for hours. Plenty of time for us to get acquainted." Fear and fury warred within Francesca. She could try to wait them out, but if they were determined to enter, the door wouldn't hold them for long. Better to face them directly, with the rifle in hand. Taking a deep breath, she called out, "Mr. Bridges, I suggest you and your friends leave my property immediately." "I have no interest in speaking with you." Bridges grinned up at the window. "Now, is that any way to treat visitors? We rode all this way to see you." "I'm asking you politely to leave," Francesca replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I won't ask again." Bridges' expression hardened. "Listen here, woman. Your husband humiliated me in town, stole what should have been mine. I'm just here to even the score a bit. By threatening a woman alone, very brave of you." Her sarcasm seemed to enrage him. With a curse, Bridges started toward the door. "Boys, let's go introduce ourselves properly." Francesca raised the rifle and fired a warning shot over their heads. The men ducked, Bridges swearing colorfully. "The next one won't be a warning," she called out, working the lever to chamber another round. "I'm a very good shot, Mr. Bridges." My husband made sure of that. For a moment, the men hesitated, clearly not having expected armed resistance. Then one of Bridges' companions drew his pistol. "She's bluffing. One woman against the three of us." "I wouldn't bet your life on it," came a new voice from behind them. All heads turned to see Jose emerging from the barn, his shotgun leveled at the intruders. Beside him stood Alina, holding a revolver with the confidence of someone who knew how to use it. "This is not your concern, Mexican," Bridges spat. Jose's expression didn't change. "The Senora is family." "That makes it my concern." The standoff might have ended there, with Bridges and his men outnumbered and outgunned, but the sound of approaching riders changed the equation once again. To Francesca's horror, she saw it wasn't Nathaniel returning, but three more rough-looking men riding in from the east. "Looks like our friends have arrived," Bridges said, his confidence returning. "Now the odds are in our favor." Jose and Alina exchanged worried glances but held their positions. Inside the house, Francesca's mind raced. They were outnumbered now, and while she, Jose, and Alina were all armed, they couldn't hope to hold off 6 determined men for long. The new arrivals dismounted, joining Bridges in the yard. One of them, a tall man with a badly healed broken nose, looked around appreciatively. "Nice place, Bridges. Worth the ride out here." "Told you," Bridges replied. "Cooper's been doing well for himself. Time to remind him of his place." He raised his voice. "Last chance, Mrs. Cooper. Come out, and maybe we won't burn this place to the ground when we're done." Francesca's heart pounded in her chest. Where was Nathaniel? How long before he returned? Could the three of them hold off these men until help arrived? As though in answer to her unspoken questions, the thunder of hooves sounded from the west. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Nathaniel's chestnut stallion in the lead, with Tommy and Lee close behind. They'd returned early, perhaps hearing the warning shot. Bridges and his men turned to face the new threat, hands dropping to their weapons. Nathaniel pulled his horse to a stop, taking in the scene with a single glance. Bridges and his men in the yard, Jose and Alina with weapons raised, Francesca at the window with the rifle. "Bridges," he said, his voice cold, "you're trespassing." Bridges sneered. "Just paying a social call, Cooper. No law against that. There are laws against threatening a man's wife and employees." Nathaniel dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate. Tommy and Lee followed his lead, spreading out slightly. "I'm giving you one chance to leave peacefully." "Or what?" Bridges challenged. "Even with your boys, you're still outnumbered." "Am I?" Nathaniel's expression was deadly calm. "Jose, Alina, and my wife are all armed. That makes 6 against 6, and unlike your men, mine know what they're fighting for." The tension in the yard was palpable, every man's hand hovering near a weapon. Francesca held her breath, the rifle steady in her hands as she sighted on Bridges. "Think carefully, Bridges," Nathaniel continued, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Even if you win this fight, you won't live to enjoy it. The Rangers take a dim view of men who attack homesteads. They'll hunt you down, and if they don't, I will. Something in his tone, the absolute certainty of it, seemed to give Bridges pause. He glanced at his men, then back at Nathaniel. "This isn't over, Cooper," he finally said, but the threat sounded hollow. "It is over," Nathaniel replied. "If I see you or any of your men near my property or my family again, I won't waste time with warnings." For a long moment, it seemed Bridges might push the confrontation further. Then, with a curse, he jerked his head at his men. "Mount up. We're wasting time here." Francesca didn't lower the rifle until the last of the riders had disappeared down the trail. Only then did she sink into a chair, her legs suddenly weak with relief. Outside, she could see Nathaniel speaking intently with Jose and the hands, probably organizing a watch in case Bridges decided to return. When Nathaniel finally entered the house, his face was drawn with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, crossing to her side immediately. Francesca nodded, setting the rifle aside. "I'm fine, just a little shaken." Nathaniel knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. We were checking the east boundary when we heard the shot." "How did you get back so quickly? We were already on our way." Tommy spotted dust from riders heading this direction. "We rode hard once we realized they were heading straight for the ranch." His fingers tightened around hers. "If anything had happened to you..." Francesca leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "Nothing happened. Jose and Alina were here. And I know how to handle a rifle, thanks to you." Nathaniel smiled slightly. "I heard about the warning shot. Jose said you were magnificent." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave isn't about not being afraid. It's about what you do despite the fear." He pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I'm so proud of you." That night, after ensuring the ranch was secure with Tommy and Lee taking turns on watch, Nathaniel held Francesca close in their bed. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low in the darkness. "Maybe we should consider moving. Finding a place farther from Fort Davis, away from Harrington's influence and men like Bridges." Francesca propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "This is your home. You built it from nothing. I won't let men like that drive us away." Nathaniel touched her face gently. "It's not worth the risk to you." "I disagree," she said firmly. "This is our home now, Nathaniel. I won't let them take it from us any more than you would." He studied her face in the moonlight filtering through the window. "You've changed since you arrived here. For the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better. Though I thought you were pretty remarkable from the beginning." His smile faded. "But Bridges won't let this go easily. He's a dangerous man." "So are you when necessary," she pointed out. "And you have something he doesn't." "What's that?" "People who love you. People willing to stand beside you." She kissed him softly. "We'll face whatever comes together." In the weeks that followed, Nathaniel increased security around the ranch. The hands took turns on night watch, and no one rode out alone. Jose sent word to friends in neighboring ranches, ensuring everyone was alert for trouble. But Bridges and his men seemed to have vanished, at least temporarily. Summer gave way to fall, bringing cooler temperatures and new routines. Francesca discovered, to her surprise and delight, that she was with child. The news transformed Nathaniel, his joy tempered only by increased concern for her safety. "Now we definitely need to consider moving," he insisted one evening as they sat by the fire. "At least until the baby comes." But Francesca remained steadfast. "This is where our child should be born, on Cooper land." They were still debating the matter when Jose burst in one evening in early October, his expression grim. "Riders coming," he said without preamble. "At least a dozen." Nathaniel was on his feet immediately. Bridges. Jose shook his head. Don't think so. They're coming openly, not trying to hide their approach. Francesca joined them at the window, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. The setting sun illuminated a large group of horsemen approaching the ranch, too many to fight off if they came with ill intent. Get your rifle, Nathaniel told her quietly. Just in case. As the riders drew closer, however, Nathaniel's tension visibly eased. It's the Rangers, he said, recognizing the distinctive hats and badges glinting in the fading light. And, is that Sheriff Patterson with them? Indeed it was. The town sheriff from Fort Davis dismounted first, followed by a tall ranger captain. Nathaniel went out to meet them, Francesca watching anxiously from the door. Cooper, the sheriff called in greeting. Sorry to arrive unannounced, but we've got news you'll want to hear. The ranger captain stepped forward, introducing himself as Captain Winters. Mr. Cooper, Mrs. Cooper, he nodded to Francesca. We've been tracking a gang operating in this area, led by a man named Bridges. Nathaniel's posture stiffened. We're familiar with him, figured as much. The captain didn't seem surprised. We caught up with them yesterday trying to rob a stage near Van Horn. There was a firefight. Bridges is dead, Sheriff Patterson said bluntly. Along with 3 of his men, the rest are in custody. The simple statement landed like a stone in still water. Francesca felt a wave of relief so profound it made her dizzy. We found some interesting documents among Bridges' possessions, the ranger continued. Seems he was working for someone in Fort Davis, someone who wanted to drive you off your land, someone willing to pay handsomely for it. Harrington, Nathaniel said, not a question. Captain Winters nodded. We're paying him a visit next. Thought you should know the threat's been dealt with. That night, after the Rangers had gone with promises to keep them informed about the investigation into Harrington, Nathaniel and Francesca sat on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. For the first time in months, the air seemed lighter somehow, the future stretching before them unobstructed. So, Nathaniel said, his hand resting lightly on Francesca's stomach. Still determined to stay on Cooper land, she smiled, covering his hand with her own. More than ever. This is where we belong, where our child belongs. Children, he corrected, his eyes twinkling. I'm hoping for at least 3, Francesca laughed. Let's see how we manage with one first. Fair enough. He drew her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. You know, when I rode into that auction room in Fort Davis, I never imagined this is where we'd end up. Nor did I when I stepped off that stagecoach. She turned to face him fully. But I wouldn't change a moment of it, not a single moment. Spring came again to Cooper Ranch, bringing with it new life in more ways than one. The cattle herd had increased by nearly 100 head. The ranch was prospering. And most importantly, a new generation of Coopers had arrived, a healthy baby boy they named James, after Nathaniel's father. Harrington had fled Fort Davis before the Rangers could arrest him, reportedly heading for California. His empire had crumbled in his absence, his land divided and sold. The shadow he had cast over Nathaniel's life was finally gone. On a perfect April evening, 1 year after Francesca had first arrived in Fort Davis as a mail-order bride to be sold to the highest bidder, she sat on the porch of her home, nursing her 3-month-old son while Nathaniel finished his evening chores. The setting sun painted the landscape in gold and crimson, the same colors that had greeted her on that first ride to the ranch. Nathaniel joined her, settling into the chair beside hers. His eyes, warm with love, moved from her face to their son's. Happy? He asked simply. Francesca smiled, taking in the ranch, the land, the man beside her, and the child in her arms all the pieces of a life she could never have imagined when she left Philadelphia in desperation. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she answered truthfully. And as night fell over Cooper Ranch, husband and wife sat together in contented silence, the stars emerging above them like promises kept, their future as vast and full of possibility as the Texas sky.